Hello, everyone. Our topic for today is sociological perspective in understanding the self. We will discuss the history and meaning of sociology, perspectives in sociology, the self and society, the self and culture, sociological theories of the self, which include John Locke, Charles Cooley, George Herbert Mead, Jean Baudrillard, self as a social construct, and self in families. With the advent of social science in the 18th century, new ways of knowing have emerged. The new discipline departed from philosophy's heavy reliance on speculation and shifted to observation as a valid approach of knowing what is real and true. This new approach cultivated philosophical objectivity in understanding the world, specifically in its nature. Humanity started to be considered as being part of the natural world and gained attention as acceptable subject of study. The society, patterns of social relationship, social interaction, and culture of everyday life is being studied. The self is presented contrary to the philosophical view, whereby self is considered as having two components of the body and soul, or the body and mind. Self in this topic is emphasized as social by nature. Beginning from birth, it continuously interacts with the external world that determines what it might be, what it can be, and what it will be. The self is shaped by external forces that constitute society, community, and family, among others. These perspectives offer sociological or sociologists theoretical paradigms for explaining how society influences people and vice versa. Structural functionalism, a school of thought according to which each of the institutions, relationships, roles, and norms that together constitute a society serves a purpose, and each is indispensable for the continued existence of the others and of society as a whole. They are interrelated. In structural functionalism, social change is regarded as an adaptive response to some tension within the social system. When some part of an integrated social system changes, a tension between this and other parts of the system is created, which will be resolved by the adaptive change of the other parts. Symbolic interactionism, also known as symbolic interaction perspective, is a major framework of the sociological theory. This perspective relies on the symbolic meaning that people develop and build upon in the process of social interaction. Symbolic interaction theory analyzes society by addressing the subjective meanings that people impose on objects, events, and behaviors. Subjective meanings are given primacy because it is believed that people behave based on what they believe and not just what is objectively true. Thus, society is thought to be socially constructed through human interpretation. People interpret one another's behavior, and it is these interpretations that form the social bond. These interpretations are called the definition of the situation. Conflict perspective asserts that social problems occur when dominant groups mistreat subordinate ones, and thus advocates for a balance of power between genders. It is a view of society that posits conflict as a normal feature of social life. According to its adherents, conflict influences the distribution of power and the direction and magnitude of social change. Under the conflict perspective, the basic form of interaction in society is not cooperation, but competition, and this leads to conflict. Because the individuals and groups of society compete for advantage, there is constantly conflict for change. When there are large groups competing, such as Marx's bourgeoisie and proletariat, the outcome is often major social change. This conflict can arise from the desire to own the means of production, to own the power or land, or to own the realm of political power, and can be revolutionary, as it was in many of the communist societies that practiced Marxist teachings. The self and society. It has been believed that the self has been characterized as separate, self contained, independent, consistent, unitary, and private. It suggests that self is distinct to others. It is self contained and independent because it can exist by itself. It is contained in its own thoughts, characteristics, and volition. It does not allow other self for it to exist. It has a personality that is enduring or persists over time. It is centered on its experiences and thoughts. The self is isolated from the external world. However, in sociology, humans cannot be understood apart from its social context. Society is linked to the individual as they are inherently connected and dependent on each other. Society, being composed of a large social groupings sharing in the same geographical territory, implies that groups who are living together have the same cultures and predisposed to institutions which provide their physical, social, and psychological needs, and which maintain order and the values of the culture. An individual is capable of seeing through his or her experiences and the larger society called sociological imagination, in which society creates opportunities for him or her to think and act, as well as limiting his or her thoughts and actions. The self should not be seen as a static entity which remains constant through time. It persistently struggles with its external reality and is flexible in dealing with it. Being active participant in its social world and self through interaction is made and remade. As it continuously interacts with others, society is continually changing and dynamic, so does self. Self, being endlessly exposed to its social world, is subjected to its influences here and there. Self is considered as multifaceted or having different aspects, features, or qualities. These are the philosophers. The first one is John Locke. He is an English philosopher from the 1600s who insisted that each newborn human being is a tabula rasa or blank slate. He believed that newborns have no personality, thus could be molded into anything with training. Charles H. Cooley developed the idea of the looking glass self, the interactive process by which we develop an image of ourselves based on how we imagine or we appear to others. Using the view of others, Cooley denotes that understanding of self is socially constructed. Through social interaction, one's sense of self is mirrored from the judgments they receive from others to measure their own worth, values, and behavior. This process involves the following. An individual in a social situation imagines how they appear to others. Next, the individual imagines others' judgment of that appearance. And the third, the individual develops feelings of pride or shame and responds to those perceived judgments. The theory of Charles Cooley is appealing if not complicated by some context of interaction and nature of people involved in the process. Feedback, for one, plays an important role in the process. However, not all feedback is taken or carried out in the same way. Thus, not all judgments or view of other people to oneself may affect how he or she measure his or her worth, values, and behavior. For instance, some take responses from those whom they trust most than those of strangers. Misinterpretations of signals may also occur from the point of view of the person examining him or herself. One's value system can be also taken into consideration when thinking through any changes to their behavior or views of self. Ultimately, people constantly seek to create consistency between their internal and external worlds and therefore continue to perceive, adjust, and strive for equilibrium throughout their lives. Cooley's theory is notable because it suggests that self-concept is built not in solitude but rather within social settings. In this way, society and individuals are not separate, but rather two complementary aspects of the same phenomenon. The rise of social media makes the process of the looking glass self infinitely more complex. Platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and the like make it possible to connect with others in ways never before imagined. However, this exposure has led to an ever increasing number of mirrors, thus proposing new questions about the development of self. Social media has brought with it the concept of the cyber self. The cyber self is the version of him or herself a person chooses to present on a digital platform. As in real life, the cyber self may interact with other individuals, receive social feedback, and align to social conformities. However, the differences between the cyber self and the actual self are profound. A person may possess many versions of the cyber self. He or she may present a professional self on LinkedIn, a casual self in Twitter, or an artistic self on Pinterest. The cyber self also continues to exist in social spaces even when people are not interacting with those environments in real time. In this way, social media users are never fully removed from exposure to judgment and criticism. And unlike the actual self, the cyber self is far more flexible when it comes to being shaped, updated, and perfected. These unique qualities of the cyber self raise a host of psychological issues and concerns. Individuals may experience a greater sense of urgency to return or remain in digital spaces. They may be increasingly involved in the curation of their online identities, possibly at the cost of developing their real world selves. The host of digital platforms involved also brings into question whether one's identity may become splintered or whether developmental problems will result. All these consequences are more severe when digital users are young or in their teens. However, changes to the social self via digital platforms are not always steeped in such negative implications. A study published in the Journal of Social Media and Society, for example, describes a host of positive outcomes that arise from the digital looking glass self. When YouTube video producers were interviewed about their content creation practices and its influence on their sense of self, they were offered a range of positive responses. These include a sense of gained confidence, enhanced creativity, overcoming of major social hurdles, increased sense of self-worth, a strengthened professional image, feelings of altruism and helping others through their content, and interacting in a positive social space. Among sociologists, Mead is most well known for his theory of the self, which he presented in his well regarded and much thought book, Mind, Self, and Society. As a prerequisite of being able to understand the self, one has to develop self awareness. This can be derived from looking at ourselves from the perspective of others. For instance, we put ourselves into someone else's shoes and look at the world through that someone's perspective. This process is only made possible by social interaction. If social interaction is absent, particularly in one's early experiences, he or she will find difficulty in developing an ability to see him or herself as others would see him or her. According to Mead, the self in such case is not being developed. By stages, Mead states that self develops through social interaction. 1. Preparatory stage. Children in this stage are only capable of imitating actions of others. Example, people they particularly in contact with, such as their family members. They have no ability to imagine yet how others see things. Play stage. At this stage, children begin to try to take on the role of other person by acting out grown-up behaviors, dressing like adults, etc. Game stage. While children learn about several rules of others, they understand how these rules interact with each other in this stage. They learn to understand complex interactions involving different people with variety of purpose. In a restaurant, for instance, a child understands different responsibilities of people who work together for a smooth sailing experience. He or she understands that someone from the restaurant takes orders, others wash dishes, cook the food, etc. And number 4, generalized other. In this stage, children develop, understand, and learn the idea of the common behavioral expectations of the general society. They are able to imagine how they are viewed by one or many. Med pointed out that self in this stage is being developed. George Mead is also known for his concept of I and me. According to Mead, the self has two sides. The I is the unsocialized, spontaneous, self-interested component of personality. Very large role in children. The I is the response to the me or the person's individuality. Me is the part of ourself that is aware of the expectations and attitudes of society. This is very large role in adults. The me represents the expectations and attitudes of others, generalized others. It is the organized set of attitudes of others that the individual assumes. According to Mead, the generalized other internalized in the me is the major instrument of social control, for it is the mechanism by which the community exercises control over the conduct of its individual members. Next is Jean Vodrillard, a French sociologist, cultural theorist, and a sharp critic of contemporary society, culture, and thought. He commented on some of the most salient cultural and sociological phenomena of the contemporary era, including the erasure of the distinctions of gender, race, and class that structured modern societies in a new postmodern consumer, media, and high tech society. The mutating roles of art and aesthetics, fundamental changes in politics, culture, and human beings, and the impact of new media, information, and cybernetic technologies in the creation of a qualitatively different social order, providing fundamental mutations of human and social life. Baudrillard's concept of hyperreality is closely linked to his idea of simulacrum, which he defines as something which replaces reality with its representations. Baudrillard observes that the contemporary world is a simulacrum where reality has been replaced by false images to such an extent that one cannot distinguish between the real and the unreal. In his book Simulations, Baudrillard offered four basic historic phases of the sign. 1. There is truth, a basic reality which is faithfully represented. It represents the monotony and repetitiveness of life. Number 2, reality exists, but is distorted in representation. Life in reality was grim and dull, but it was presented in a glamorized and romanticized image. Number 3, reality does not exist, but this fact is hidden through representation that feigns a reality. What is shown is not the reality, but another sign which has no semblance with reality. And number 4, there is no relationship between the reality and representation because there is no real to reflect. In the age of the hyperreal, the image or simulation dominates. The age of production has given way to the age of simulation, where products are sold even before they exist. The simulacrum pervades every level of existence. Examples from contemporary everyday life include the creation and remolding of virtual selves that may seldom have any basis on reality. In internet chats or chat rooms and discussion groups, and the 24-hour news channels that bombard us with information proves that the representation is more important than what is being represented. He also believed that in postmodern societies, individuals achieve a self-identity through prestige symbol that they consume, the brand of clothes, shoes, bags, jewelries they wear, the places they visit, the food they eat, the car they drove, and many more. The self as social construct is derived from the idea that society, which takes part in its shaping, is a social construction. Through social interaction, an active understanding of the social reality by collective actions of people, living together and their relationships become meaningful. By active understanding, it means that individuals are not only passive participants in their social life. Through language, they privately and publicly utilize or share symbols within their interactions. This creates a pattern that shapes and influences who they are, how they behave, and think. Every human is born helpless or dependent from the external world. The first group that one interacts with and depends for the fulfillment of his or her needs is the family. As the basic social institution, the family is the primary provider or source of a child's needs, human, social, economic. It is also the main avenue for teaching young individuals the basic things that they need to learn to fit in the society. It has also the capacity to develop or encourage the actualization of one's potentials. These are all made possible by way of socialization whereby one learns basic ways of living, language, values, etc. by way of imitating or observation or teaching by an adult member of the family, such as the mother and the father. A child learns ways of living his or her selfhood by being with the family. Learning self in the family is conscious or unconscious. If reared with respectful family, then he or she becomes respectful. If raised with a conversational family, then he or she becomes conversational. Ways of living that are explicitly taught are those that are basic for the child to learn, such as table manners, speaking with an elder, and so on. Through rewards and punishments, some behaviors and attitudes are indirectly taught to a child. For example, talking about sexual behavior or how to comfort emotions are internalized by a child through interpreting intonation of voice by adults or of their model in the family. Clearly, these point out that becoming an adult who does not learn about basic matters such as manners or conduct indicates failure of the family to initiate him or her into the world. In this sense, the initial conception of selfhood for social survival and becoming a human person is learned in the family. Another important aspect of social process within the family is the learning of gender by a child. Gender partly determines how one sees him or herself in the world. Though gender is considered as part or aspect of the self that is subject to alteration, change and development, it is noteworthy that its concept is primarily acquired in the family. In a relatively conservative culture such as the Philippines, for instance, husbands for the most part are expected to provide for the family. Exposed to this kind of system, the sons in the family internalize an inkling to being a future provider, to behave and think like a man. Female members of the family who are mostly exposed to their mothers' rules tend to imitate the same mentality of women as care providers in the family, according to Nancy Shodrov, a feminist. Providing dolls instead of guns to girls also reinforces the notion of what roles they should take. That's the kind of self concept they should develop. That's all for today, and thank you so much for listening.